Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. For the very first time, Russian and Chinese nuclear bombers flew close to the American territory of Alaska, forcing the North American Aerospace Defense Command to scramble their own set of fighter jets to intercept the Russian and the Chinese bombers. The interception was carried out by using the F-16 and F-35 fighter jets, along with Canada's CF-18 fighter jets. According to NORAD, the Russian and the Chinese bombers were not seen as a threat, but this is the first time that the Russian and the Chinese bombers took off from the same airbase in northeast Russia. So how is the Russia-China alliance changing the balance of power in the Arctic? Our next report gets you more details. These are nuclear bombers that are part of the Russian and the Chinese Air Force. In this video released by the Russian Defense Ministry, the Russian and the Chinese nuclear bombers are shown taking off in the dead of the night for a mission over the Bering Sea that would create a flutter in the North American air defense systems. Two Russian Tu-95s and two Chinese H-6 bombers entered what is known as the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone, accompanied by the Russian fighter jets such as the Sukhoi Su-30M and the Su-35s. The Air Defense Identification Zone of a country is considered to be a part of the international airspace, and the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone is the area where the American sovereign airspace ends, but any aircraft that enters into this space must identify itself in the interests of American security. The Americans immediately scrambled their F-16 and F-35 fighter jets. Canada, which is also a part of the North American Aerospace Defense Command, scrambled its CF-18 fighter jets for interception. The Russian and the Chinese nuclear bombers did not enter into the American airspace, but they were just 200 miles away from the American shores. On being questioned about the timing and message of such air maneuvers using nuclear bombers, the American Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin tried to downplay the significance of what this incident meant.
In terms of the message that the Russians and the Chinese are sending, I'll tell you what message we're sending. And that message is we're going to be at the ready. We are at the ready. We will always be at the ready. We're going to defend this nation. And so if there is a challenge or a threat to the United States of America, your troops will be at the ready and they will do the right thing.
Infringing into the Air Defense Identification Zone is a classic grey zone tactic. China does this to Taiwan day in and day out. A country's airspace is defined as 12 nautical miles from the shoreline to an elevation of 100 kilometers till the Kármán line where the outer space begins. To infringe into a country's airspace is a violation of the country's sovereignty, but entering into a country's air defense identification zone is perfectly legal. So grey zone tactics are carried out to test the preparedness of a country's air defense systems. The United States too plays this game of cat and mouse. On the 21st of July, the United States flew a pair of its B-52 strategic bombers over the Bering Sea in the Arctic, forcing the Russians to scramble the MiG-29 and MiG-31 fighter jets for interception. In the Ukrainian battlefield, Russia and the United States are fighting a proxy war. But in the Arctic, as the ice is beginning to thaw, Russia and the United States are increasingly testing each other's military capabilities. In the last decade, Russia has reopened about 50 previously closed Soviet-era military posts. It has refurbished 13 air bases, 10 radar stations, and 20 border outposts. The Russian Special Forces are also a part of the Arctic Brigade and have been deployed for military drills and exercises. In 2017, Russia unveiled an ultra-modern military base on the Franz Josef Land island called the Arctic Trefoil. This is Russia's northernmost military outpost and is the second of its kind facility after Kotelny. Interestingly, China is nowhere near the Arctic, but in a white paper that was released in 2018, China called itself a near-Arctic state. Washington's two-decade-long policy to try and contain China, along with a proxy war that has now broken out in Ukraine, has pushed Moscow and Beijing closer than ever before. So Russia and China, together testing the air defense preparedness of the United States by flying their nuclear bombers, is the clearest indicator that a war in the Arctic means the United States will have to fight the forces of Russia and China combined. One of the world's most powerful drug lords, Ismael Zambada Garcia, the co-founder and leader of Mexico's Sinaloa cartel, was arrested by the U.S. federal agents in El Paso, Texas. Zambada co-founded one of the world's most violent and powerful drug trafficking organizations with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman in the late 1980s. Arrested with Zambada on Thursday was the son of the former partner, El Chapo Guzman's son, Joaquin Guzman Lopez. The arrest of these two top leaders of Mexico's Sinaloa drug cartel will no doubt be heralded by the President Joe Biden's administration as a major victory in the war on drugs. The arrest of Zambada, who had evaded authorities for decades by keeping a low profile and for whose capture the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration had offered a reward of up to $15 million, has come as a huge shock for Mexico. But what led to the arrest of Zambada, arguably the biggest drug lord in the world at the moment, and certainly the most influential in the Americas? Our next report gets you more details.
An arrest that struck at the heart of the cartel responsible for majority of drugs killing Americans from coast to coast. 76-year-old Ismael Zambada Garcia, better known as El Mayo, was arrested alongside Joaquin Guzman Lopez, son of El Chapo, by U.S. officials at a private airfield in El Paso, Texas. Reportedly, Zambada was tricked into boarding the plane under false pretenses by Lopez. It was the result of a months-long operation by Homeland Security Investigations and the FBI. Zambada believed that he was going to inspect clandestine airstrips in southern Mexico, but was instead flown to a private airfield outside El Paso, Texas. Allegedly, Lopez, who surrendered to U.S. authorities, blamed Zambada for the capture of his father, El Chapo, and hence turned on him. El Chapo was extradited to the United States in 2017 and is serving a life sentence in a maximum security prison. Mexico's Security Minister, Rosa Rodriguez, admitted that her government was made aware of the detention of both Zambada and Lopez by the US government, but that the Mexican authorities had no role to play in the operation to apprehend them.
La embajada confirmó la información.
The US Embassy confirmed the information and repeated they had checked the identity of the two people. From the Ministry of Security, we requested a photograph to inform superior authorities. The embassy said they had seen the images of the two people through a video filmed at the US government offices. The question is if we had participated in this arrest. No, the government of Mexico didn't participate in this capture or handing in. We will keep collaborating with the US government as we've done until now.
The two arrested men led Sinaloa cartel, one of the most violent and powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. According to American prosecutors, Sinaloa cartel is the biggest supplier of drugs to the US. In February this year, Zambada was charged by US federal prosecutors with conspiracy to manufacture and distribute fentanyl, a drug considered more powerful than heroin and a leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. After El Chapo's extradition to the United States in 2017, his four sons, known as Los Chapitos or Little Chapos, took over his faction of the Sinaloa cartel and became some of the biggest exporters of fentanyl to the US. The transnational criminal organization Sinaloa cartel pioneered the manufacture of fentanyl, often from products sourced in China, and then smuggled it across the border from Mexico into the US. Such is the menace of fentanyl that in 2023, out of more than 107,000 drug overdose deaths in the United States, Fentanyl accounted for about 70% of them. Following the arrest of Zambada and Lopez, US Attorney General Merrick Garland said, "Fentanyl is the deadliest drug threat our country has ever faced." And the Justice Department will not rest until every single cartel leader, member and associate responsible for poisoning our communities is held accountable. Whether these arrests lead to dismantling of Sinaloa cartel or not, it sure is a big victory for US authorities.
Myanmar has been engulfed in chaos since February 2021, when the Myanmar military had deposed the democratically elected civilian government of the Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi. The coup triggered a wave of protest that has transformed into a nationwide armed rebellion against the junta. On the 25th of July, both the Myanmar junta and an ethnic minority armed group claimed to be in control of the town of Lashio and the regional military command in northern Shan state following days of clashes. Myanmar's military has suffered repeated blows at the hands of the resistance fighters and the ethnic minority rebels since October 27th last year, losing over 100 military outposts and several key border towns. Reportedly, the rebels now wield control over 80% of the townships in the embattled nation. With its battlefield credibility now severely dented, the Myanmar junta, which was once considered a powerful army in the region, is at its most vulnerable and also is facing its sternest challenge so far. Our next report gets you more details.
The town of Lashio, home to the Myanmar's military Northeastern Command, has been rocked by fighting since the 3rd of July, when an alliance of ethnic armed groups renewed an offensive against junta troops. According to the local media reports, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army fully captured the headquarters of the Northeast Military Command in Lashio on Thursday morning. Not just that, the MNDAA also captured Lashio town, home to around 150,000 people. The junta, however, contradicted the claim, saying that the insurgents have only infiltrated the outskirts of Lashio. The alliance of three Myanmar ethnic minority groups, the Taang National Liberation Army, the Arakan Army, and the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, collectively known as the Brotherhood Alliance, has launched coordinated attacks on the military since the 27th of October last year. The offensive, named by rebels as Operation 1027, signifying the date on which it began, has made inroads into the junta-controlled areas in the northern Shan state, Kaya state in the east, and the Rakhine state in the west. Since late last month, the northern Shan state has been rocked by fighting, when the alliance renewed an offensive against the military along the highway to China's Yunnan province. These renewed clashes have shredded a Beijing-brokered truce that in January had halted a campaign by the Brotherhood Alliance. On the day the MDNAA claimed the capture of Lashio, Beijing said that it is monitoring the situation closely and urged a halt to the fighting.
China pays great attention to the situation in northern Myanmar. We have been urging relevant parties in Myanmar to adhere to dialogue and consultation, end the fighting as soon as possible, resolve differences by peaceful means, and avoid escalation of the situation. In particular, they must not endanger the Chinese border residents and companies and personnel of Chinese projects in Myanmar. We will continue to promote peace talks and maintain the momentum of ceasefire and talks in northern Myanmar.
Beijing is a major ally and arms supplier to the junta, but analysts opine that it also maintains ties with armed ethnic groups in Myanmar that hold territory near its border. A $1 billion rail route, part of Beijing's Global Belt and Road Infrastructure project, is planned in the northern Shan state. But the escalating conflict has put a question mark on the viability of the project.
What that means, and I think at least currently means the bilateral trade between, at least bilateral border trade between China and Myanmar has probably come to a stop, right? And basically waiting for the situation to improve, and then we see how things will go. If Myanmar does not have domestic instability, then what's the point of talking about Belt and Road? Right? I mean, you cannot have sort of stable economic relations or investment in infrastructure or in many sort of sectors of the economy if you don't have domestic stability.
Junta's unwillingness to engage with a regional peace plan to resolve the conflict was slammed at the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting in Laos. Both Singapore and Indonesia have been critical of the junta's power grab, which has divided the 10-member ASEAN bloc. Amidst a series of battlefield defeats for the once feared military, all duties of Myanmar's figurehead president, Min Sui, have been transferred to the chief of the ruling junta, Min Aung Hlaing, who is in his weakest position since deposing the government. Will Min Aung Hlaing be able to contain an expanding civil war and manage a crumbling economy?
Beijing and Manila have agreed to a deal that is intended to end confrontations at the fiercely contested Second Thomas Shoal in the South China Sea. The crucial deal was reached on Sunday after a series of meetings and exchange of diplomatic notes between the Chinese and the Philippine diplomats in Manila. Interestingly, the very next day, the Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., in his annual State of the Nation address to the Congress, struck a defiant tone, saying that his country will not yield or waver on its stand on territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Both Beijing and Manila have shied away from providing details of the provisional agreement that has now come in the backdrop of the increasingly hostile clashes in the sea, which has sparked fears of larger conflicts potentially involving even the United States. Our next report gets you more details.
China claims nearly all of the South China Sea, including the Second Thomas Shoal, which hosts a tiny Philippine garrison stationed on a deliberately grounded, decrepit warship. Manila maintains a rusty naval ship in the contested waters to reinforce its own maritime claims. The handful of Philippine soldiers stationed there require regular rations. Beijing, blaming Manila of violating international law, has routinely attempted to block Philippine resupply missions to the shoal, employing dangerous maneuvers such as shadowing, blocking, and firing water cannons. China's expansive claims itself were rejected in a 2016 ruling by the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague. In a major breakthrough on Sunday, both sides agreed to a quote-unquote provisional agreement to jointly manage maritime differences and de-escalate the situation.
Based on China's three-point principal positions on handling the current situation at Renaishao, the temporary arrangement with the Philippines on the delivery of humanitarian supplies reflects China's goodwill. We hope that the Philippine side will honor its commitment, work closely with China, and jointly manage the maritime situation.
The following day, calling for tensions in this strategic waterway to be settled through diplomatic channels, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said that his country will not yield or waver on its stand on territorial disputes in the South China Sea. He ended up receiving a standing ovation when he declared, and I quote, "The West Philippine Sea is ours."
In our international relations, we have faced challenges to our territorial sovereignty, and we will assert our rights and interests in the same fair and pacific way that we have always done. Proper diplomatic channels and mechanisms under the rules-based international order remain the only acceptable means of settling disputes. Peace and community building will always be our clarion call, especially when the country serves as chair and the host of ASEAN Summit in 2026. We continuously try to find ways to de-escalate tensions in contested areas with our counterparts without compromising our position and our principles. I know that our neighbors too are doing their best to make this work. The Philippines cannot yield. The Philippines cannot waver.
But China and Philippines are not the only claimants of this strategic waterway. Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam and Taiwan also have overlapping claims to this major global trade route, believed to be sitting atop rich undersea deposits of oil and natural gas. The rare deal with the Philippines, in all likelihood, will spark hope that similar arrangements could be forged by Beijing with other countries to avoid clashes. But the important question is this: how long will this crucial rare deal, which has been billed a gesture of goodwill, hold?
And with that's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.